Hey, everybody, it's Mark. Thanks for joining me today. With me today on my podcast is Dustin Martin. Dustin is the founder and the CEO of UpPaint. UpPaint is a paint recycler in Colorado. Paint recycling is something that we are all, as paint retailers and as participants, stakeholders in the paint distribution channels in this country, we are all going to deal with paint recycling in the coming years. And that is because Paint Care, through legislation now in 12 states and the District of Columbia, as well as you're going to hear in a few minutes from Dustin, private companies are starting to collect waste paint. Waste paint in this country is an enormous problem. It's an enormous expense. It's taxing greatly our household hazardous waste collection processes. It's taxing greatly our landfills, as well as creating risk, obviously, for the water. And so I think that you'll hear Dustin's point as well. I think that in the coming years, every paint retailer is going to have some recycled paint content in their stores. And that's because we're collecting it and it's being reused. The raw materials that are coming from recycled paint are every bit as good as the quality of the raw materials that is coming from virgin paint. And so I think this is a category that's here to stay. And so I actually have Dustin on. I'm hoping to do another episode on paint recycling in the coming weeks as well, because I think that this is a topic that paint retailers will want to hear about. But in the meantime, give Dustin a listen, like, subscribe, shoot me an email, shoot me a text. Brian, get my numbers up on the screen. Let me know what you want to hear about, and I'm looking forward to making more content for you. Hey, everybody, thanks for joining me today. With me today on my podcast is Dustin Martin. Dustin is the founder and chief executive officer of UpPaint. UpPaint is a paint brand made from recycled raw materials. Dustin, how are you today?
Great, Mark. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on the show. I appreciate it. So, Dustin, before we get talking about UpPaint, why don't you tell me a little bit about your career that brought you to this opportunity?
Yeah, so for a long part of my career, I was in healthcare. And then we ran across a paint recycler at a trade show about 2 years ago. And we were immediately fascinated, intrigued by that. So that was sort of the beginning of UpPaint.
And so tell me a little bit about UpPaint. What is it that you guys are doing and what is it that you hope to accomplish with the brands?
Well, when we discovered that there were actually paint recyclers out there, which, by the way, is relatively new market, we thought to ourselves, how big is recycled paint? How much wasted, unused paint goes, uncaptured, if you will, every year? And found out that the EPA actually did a study on this. And out of the close to billion gallons of paint sold in just the US every year, 10 to 15% goes wasted.
They're expecting 85 million gallons of paint to be wasted this year. When you think about the weight of that at 10 pounds a gallon, what an enormous burden to the nation's landfills and hazardous household waste facilities. It's really a problem.
Right, yeah. And that, I think, a lot of people can identify with, because intrinsic to every painting project, you have to buy a little bit extra. And through that, you're going to end up with cans sitting in your garage, sitting in your basement, that a lot of people just don't know what to do with.
20 years or so ago, people started talking about that problem. And then I'll just sort of fast forward a couple of decades, Paint Care, who I think I mentioned to you, I'm working for now as a consultant. Paint Care started solving this problem in states. They're in about 10 of them now, maybe 11 states now. Paint Care's operation has created a whole new opportunity, a whole new industry, because there's all of this paint being collected, which is quality raw materials. It's quality resin and it's quality pigment and it's quality whatever else is in there, defoamers and everything else. It's quality raw material that you guys don't have to pay for the second time around.
Yeah, that's right. And that's actually like our biggest question looking at the market is, how good is the paint? Yeah, it's recycled. That's great. But if it's not good paint, who wants to use it? So we had it tested and found out not only is it good paint, it's great paint, So we thought, wow, what an opportunity to check a lot of boxes. That is just a win-win-win all the way around.
Yeah, I mean the idea obviously starts with pulling the material from the waste stream, right? To pull the wasted material from the waste stream. But once we do that, 85 million gallons a year, even if you don't get it all, if you pick up 50, 60 million gallons a year, like what are we supposed to do with it? And so tell me a little bit about what you guys do with the actual paint. Tell me about the process. Tell me about the brand that you've developed.
You're exactly right. Paint care really started, I think, the industry in the sense that it became a mechanism for the collection process.
Yes.
So the recycler that we found, Green Sheen, based out of Denver, is who supplies all of our paint. So it's really a fascinating process because that's the first question people have is like, what do you do? It's every color under the rainbow. What do you do with it? So it comes in quarts, gallons, and fives, and each can is inspected. It's got to be liquid, obviously. We can't recycle if it's already dried out. And then it's filtered, and then it's separated into color groups. So whites go in the white bin, tans in the tan, grays, blues, and so on. And these get put into totes. And once we have a full tote, then it's tested, it's filtered again, and then it's tinted to one of 18 target colors that we have. So we have a specific palette, if you will, that we stock, but we can create any color that we want. We go for colors that are most popular, obviously, that we stock. But if you have contractors out there that use the same color over and over again, and can order in quantity, then we can do any color that you want.
Not just contractors, in New York, I had 2 stores in New York City before I retired. We had a lot of apartment buildings. Maybe one manager might have owned 100 buildings in the Bronx. They used the same floor paint, the same basement wall paint, the same if they were rentals apartments, the same sort of off-white semi-gloss or eggshell on the walls, every apartment after apartment. And so that would have been a great opportunity for a product like yours.
Yeah, perfect person for this type of paint. Yep, absolutely.
Right. And so right now you guys are just doing ready-made colors, is that correct?
Yeah, ready-made colors, unless we get requests from contractors like we were just talking about, specific colors that they deal with. We just delivered 250 gallons of a guy that, just like you mentioned, does multi-family housing and carports. That's all he does. He's booked for like 2 years,
Right. And they're all going to be the same. They're all going to be identical.
Yeah.
And so what a great opportunity for you guys, because that really is part of, if not the biggest disconnect through the stewardship of paint, which is what paint care is. The biggest disconnect is we figured out how to collect it, but finding a market for all of this material, and dealers have been reluctant. Some retailers have been reluctant, and that's because they don't want to cut their virgin sales out of the process. And so they've been reluctant. But the truth is there's room for everybody in this space.
We hope there is. And if we can provide the service both on the collection side and the retail side, it's a great service for retailers because they have their own paint problem. There's mistints, there's discontinued lines, there's damaged cans. And why stick that out at $2 and cannibalize your virgin paint sales when we can collect it and do something better with it? And because the collection process subsidizes the cost of the paint, we can still offer retailers incredible margins.
And so we want to start talking about that, and I want to hear about those margins because that is what dealers want to hear about. Talk to me a little bit first, though, about what products are available. I'm assuming there are some limitations to the breadth of the line because you're, working with recycled raw materials. Tell me what product line you have available.
Well, the main product line is a eggshell latex, considered indoor-outdoor paint. It's not applicable for every use, but for most painting projects, I would say 90% of the painting projects wanting to use latex paint, it's perfect. We've tested it. We've had it third-party tested. We've got the numbers to back up the quality. The consumer's essentially paying $35, $40 a gallon and getting a $60, $65 gallon of paint.
And so let's talk, since you brought up price, let's talk about how much the retailers are paying for that material.
Yeah, so retailers, we sell at $17.49 a gallon. So it's a 50% margin, worst case scenario.
Or more, yeah.
If they buy in bulk, we can do better than that. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, it's a great product for the retailers to carry. And the other thing that's great is if you're collecting paint, meaning the retailers, if they're collecting paint too, and we have a process and a system for non-paint care states, that we can collect that paint and offer, and the retailers can offer that to the consumers. It's a great community service. It's a great way to get people through the door. But then they see the finished product, what that paint turns into, up paint sitting on their shelves, and the customer gets it. This is what's happening. It's not going into landfill. They're seeing that full circle, process that takes place through what we're doing.
That's fabulous. And so one thing that I'm curious about, when you blend the paint, when you make the paint from this after the sort, are you generally just blending them together, or do you actually have a lab? Are there chemicals that you need to add?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, it's amazing how consistent the batches are when you're doing them by 250 gallons at a time, or 1,000 gallons at a time.
Right.
It's very close to eggshell every time, but then we'll test for viscosity, pH levels, all the sort of basic spec requirements. And we have a range.
And sheen as well, obviously.
Obviously sheen. Eggshell is the most popular. What people are using are what we're collecting. So we already started on a point that's most popular in terms of what's being purchased in virgin paint.
I'll tell you something interesting about the paint business, which you may not know because you just got into it in Colorado. By region across the country, sheen preference varies greatly. And in New York, if you were collecting that, you'd be making semi-gloss right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well,
and that varies by different region of the country. Obviously, eggshell is popular everywhere. I certainly don't mean to imply otherwise, but it does vary significantly.
No, that's good to know. And we can do semi-gloss too. I mean, we can do anything. There's additives that you can do to any batch to increase the sheen or decrease the sheen. So not a problem.
And so tell me, how are you selling it right now? Who is a retailer of your products right now?
Well, we're relatively new, so we're only in a handful of stores. We have some programs underway. Ace Hardware is piloting a program with us right now. So any Ace store owners, all Ace stores are individually owned independent stores, making it available to them. We can sell directly. We are selling directly through our website, but we'd really like to build out a network of independent paint retailers to sell the paint and collect the paint, create that closed loop supply chain that really helps everyone at each level.
So that's interesting that you say collect the paint rather than just distribute the paint into the channel. So you're talking about in states where there is no paint care, where there is no collection of previously used paint being done, you want to collect that paint from retailers, from their customers. Is that right?
Yeah. Green Sheen, our partner in this, has built out programs for non-paint care states. In fact, before Washington was a paint care state, they had a paid program that was hugely successful. And then it transitioned to a paint care state, which is fine and good. Paint care is a wonderful thing that actually improves things. But there's models out there for anywhere in the country. What we're doing right now is looking at each store that's interested, no matter where they are, and figuring out what it would cost to collect from that particular store. So basically transportation costs is what we're looking at.
Which, whether you're in paint care or doing this yourself, that's the largest piece of this, right? Is picking up the paint and moving it somewhere else.
It's a large piece of the puzzle. Not only is it expensive, but it increases the CO2 levels because you're burning fossil fuels in the truck, so on and so forth. So ideally, as we build out the network, we'll create mini processing facilities around the country so that paint never has to travel very far. It brings down the cost and everyone's happy.
And that's because until you guys get it, it's actually a hazardous material. And so it has to be treated as a hazardous material. And so it's expensive. It's expensive to transport it.
It's expensive to transport. It's a headache to deal with.
Yeah.
Store owners that have that the pile of cans in the corner that eventually they have to deal with. Yeah, I've talked to some that just wait long enough and then they pour out the paint onto cardboard. Put two guys on it for half a day, and it's just something they just would rather not deal with.
We used to have in our basement two 55-gallon drums, and we would just dump everything, very simple mix, water and oil, right? That was it. One drum for each. And if a customer came in and said, hey, I need 100 gallons of floor paint, what's the cheapest you can do? Well, I would tell them, well, I can take everything in that pile, and if you don't give a shit what color it's going to be, I could sell it to you all for $1 a gallon.
That's awesome.
And for the same reason, effectively, that you're doing this now, is I didn't want to waste the raw materials. But you guys, obviously, when you come to scale, you really have a lot of advantages to turn this into a more consistent product.
Yep, absolutely.
And so tell me about the coatings themselves and the feedstocks of this. Is there plenty of supply? Is this consistent looking out to the future? How does that work?
Yeah, there's plenty of supplies. Number one, most of our supply comes from our partner Green Sheen. They're really innovators in the collection process. They work with paint care.
Yeah, I've heard of Green Sheen.
They sponsor like church events where they'll bring a truck in and you can bring in your paint for free on one day in the spring or in the fall. They'll work with insurance companies. If a semi full of paint gets into an accident and it gets written off for insurance, they've got a semi full of virgin paint. So really anywhere and everywhere they can get their hands on good quality paint, it's available. And if they can't find what they need, they have their own network of other recyclers. So there's recyclers trading back and forth with one another, making sure that people have the stock they needed. So, and as we build out the collection network, that stock will only increase. So as we build out retailers selling up paint, we're also building out the collection process too. So they go hand in hand together.
And so I had wanted to ask you a little bit about the sorting process and how you guys actually make the paint, but it sounds like maybe that's not the side of the business that you're on. Is that correct?
It's not, but we're familiar with the process. We're trying to influence that process because there's needs, desires from people buying paint where, additional color choices, additional sheens. We really want to make available what the buying public's wanting. So that's not always 18 colors in the same sheen. Right. So we can help influence the recycling process, the collection process, and make sure there's a home for it once it's been recycled.
And what about the consistency from batch to batch, since it's not coming from virgin materials? As a retailer, that's one of the first things that comes to my mind is the product the same every time I get it? And so what's your answer to that?
The answer is when you're at scale and you're mixing in huge quantities, the consistency from batch to batch is really quite amazing. There's tweaks and changes that we do at the end to bring it into the same spec level. So the viscosity is the same. Certainly the color is the same from batch to batch. There's technology out there right now in chemistry where a lot of that stuff can be dealt with in an easy way. The hardest part is just the physical labor to go can by can.
That's a job that's done by hand, I would think, and will be forever. There's no technology that's going to solve that problem.
Not yet, right. But there might be soon and someday. So we'll see what happens. But
you guys are they're actually opening the cans, looking at them, seeing what product it is, putting it in a sort pile, dumping it out. I mean, there's a lot of work involved.
Yeah, the cans get recycled, the bins that the paint comes in gets recycled. But yeah, there's a lot of labor involved in it. But we're doing Green Sheen's doing 30,000 gallons a week, so it's no small enterprise. Right. And that's just from one facility.
And it's through that volume that you can get the consistency. I guess if you just grab a huge pile of gallons and keep blending them together, if the pile is big enough, eventually it'll be the same thing all the time. I think all paint people know that.
Yeah, just by the nature of who's recycling, who's willing to bring their paint in to be recycled, it tends to be higher quality paint.
Right.
And that might not always be,
That
but
could
from
be by
brand,
region as well, by the way. That
that's
wouldn't
true.
surprise me to find out that
That's
that
true.
was by region as well. For example, in New York, in my stores and in the city in general, people were inclined, the market generally speaking was inclined towards premium products. It was always like that. I'd meet
Yeah.
dealers from outside of the New York metro area, and they would tell me that they're selling, less expensive paint to contractors. And I would be like, yeah, my contractors want to buy top of the line stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so that could be regional as well.
And as the technology improves and we can we can scan each can as it comes in, so we know exactly what's in what, we can do further separation as volume increases. If we're wanting to have certain characteristics in one line versus another, we can do that. Right now, up paint is not the paint for every situation at every time. It's a good paint for 90% of what people need latex paint to do.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, I would think that for sure it's a good opportunity for selling into areas where people are maybe price sensitive. That's the first opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And less specific in terms of their needs. Right. And so floors and garages and basements are great opportunities, I suspect. To use these, or even jobs that are consistently, as I mentioned before, like this apartment maintenance company that we used to do business with, that, every apartment was the same color. For somebody like that, it seems ideal.
And, we're also creating like chalk paint. It turns out that up paint, when it's chalkified, so to speak, for rehabbing furniture and other purposes, it's a great paint for that. And it's a great connection between rehabbing furniture and recycling paint. They go hand in hand together.
Interesting. And so talk a little bit about where you think you guys are going to be in 5 years. What's the plan look like? Are dealers everywhere going to have recycled paint on their shelves?
Well, I think at some point in the future, some amount of recycled content will be in a lot of different paints and a lot of different brands. I think there's just too much wasted paint out there for manufacturers to deal only in virgin paint lines. For us specifically, it's about building out the network of collecting the paint so that there's that raw material. And then it's really a marketing campaign to tell people, hey, this is good quality paint. It's something that you could use for most projects that you're going to be really happy with. And then, like I was mentioning before, making sure that the paint comes in colors that people want to buy. Right now, there's no way to pull pigment out of paint. We have ideas around that, but that's going to involve a lot of research and chemistry.
Very expensive process.
Yeah. So right now, it's just not on the table. So, but pre-tinted paint has its advantages too. You don't have a guy sitting at a tinting machine. You don't have to have people trying to help other customers figure out what colors are going to work for them. It's a kind of grab and go. So for some stores, that's an advantage, if you have a palette that people want to buy.
Well, that's a great place to end it, Dustin. I really have a much better understanding of what's coming in the market of recycled paint and what you guys at Up Paint are doing. Any last words before we let you go?
Only to let your listeners and viewers know that if they're interested in Up Paint, if they're interested in contacting me, it's Dustin Martin, 404-488-5193. My email, dmartin@uppaint.com. If you want to find out, if you're interested in becoming a collection site and interested in offering your customers Up Paint, and so they can see that full cycle, that closed loop supply chain, or just want to find out a little bit more how it works, we'll look at your store individually and tell you what we can do for you.
Terrific. Well, Dustin Martin of Up Paint, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate the time.
Thank you, Mark. It was great to be here.